Hi everybody, Chris Titley here and welcome to Scoreboard. This episode is powered by Swyftx, Australia's top-rated crypto exchange and proudly homegrown, just like many of the athletes and business leaders we feature on Scoreboard. Hi, it's Chris Titley here. On today's episode of Scoreboard, the podcast, I am joined by Chris Anstey. Chris, great to have you for a chat, mate.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I'm looking forward to seeing where we go.
Thanks, mate. It's Friday, 19th of September at 7:30 a.m. We've both got our coffees to caffeinate ourselves for the day. Where am I joining you from today, Chris?
I'm on my pub at Hotel Trentham, so I'm up here probably half the time these days and enjoying it immensely. I've been involved with this now for just under 2 years, so learning plenty and rip a little town. Just won Australian Tiny Town of the Year, as a matter of fact, and our local footy team just won the premiership with Boomer Harvey playing for him, so it's been a big couple of weeks in town.
Oh, mate. And 2025, how would you describe it so far for Chris Anstey?
Geez, that's a good question. It's been fun. I've learnt lots, and sometimes I reckon a lot of people get to my age, and I've just turned 50, where you're slowing down or settling down, and you're pretty comfortable with what you're doing. But I'm always looking for new projects, new adventures, and this was certainly that. I've never been in hospitality before. I've never owned a pub, clearly, and this is my first swing at it. So it's learning something every day, getting to know locals and getting to understand how we can do our job better.
Sounds like you've got a curious mind around learnings and whatnot. What's some of the learnings that you've learned from a pub point of view? Is it as glamorous as it sounds of owning a pub?
Oh, look, so many. It's you do hear that people have been jaded by it, and I can see how that can happen, but it's certainly about the people, not the business. But the parallels between sport and hospitality are really interesting, and especially front of house. Clearly, when you put a kitchen staff together, you need a very skilled set of employees or staff, and that can sometimes be tricky to get. A little bit like sport, you need a skill set. But front of house, I've always wanted to hire great people, and sometimes you're not able to hire the great people. One of the biggest frustrations as a coach sometimes is wanting to hire the people that are fantastic humans, but they're not quite there from a skill perspective. But front of house, it's not that at all. If we find great people, the skill set becomes a bonus, but we can teach them the skill. And I've always believed you can teach a person a skill, you can't teach them a personality. So our staff are just incredible, and turning up to work and seeing them and spending days and sometimes very long days with them, you ask, is it as tough or as glamorous as people seem? I think any job can be fun when you turn up to the right group of people.
And when it comes to community and connection, you talk of sport and you talk of hospitality, etc. How important is sport when it comes to a community, not just the pub as well?
Oh, the most important part, and I mean, I'm not sure if this is videoed, but there's a blackboard behind us. It's always got the Trentham Saints, which is our local footy and netball club's fixture on it. And the senior men, as I mentioned, just won the premiership. They had their Mad Monday in here and probably Mad Tuesday and Wednesday as well. But no, look, it is really interesting that the sporting club becomes the hub of the town, a little bit like the pub can be, but in very different ways and oftentimes for different groups within the community. So, when we came into town, people asked if we were going to sponsor the club and that kind of thing, and we do. But it's not about sponsoring the club; it's about being actively involved in it. And I didn't tell that many people until after the grand final, actually, and because they spent a lot of time in here. And one of the main reasons we bought this pub was because of the footy and netball club. I went to 3 home games and sort of just stood around the boundary line, talked to a couple of people, and I'd done the same with a few other towns that we ended up not buying in, and we're trying to find the dickheads, and oftentimes that is one part you can find at a local country footy club, and this footy club was just incredible, and to the extent where I actually drove a few mates up one particular Saturday right when I was about to pull the trigger and say, yeah, let's do this. And I said, look, what am I missing? Walk around, don't let them know you're with me, because I think they're starting to get a sense that I'm looking at the pub. I'm 7 foot tall, I stand out, and I've now been to 3 home games. But they came back beer in hand with almost locals around their arms, just saying how great the people were. And I literally walked into the lawyer's office on Monday and signed the contract. It's just an absolute integral part of any community, but especially a small town like Trentham.
Oh, fantastic, mate. And Chris Anstey, the basketballer, people go, oh, that's the basketball, the 7-footer used to play basketball, etc. How do you go with that now, being in the community? You're Chris to people that don't know you?
Yeah, that's all I am. And some people figured it out. Some people had an idea, but no one really brought it up. And that was really valuable to me. It's such a cliche type of comment, but I always figured I was more than just being a basketball player. And, over time now, and it's been 2.5 years since we started renovating the pub, and we've gotten to know the locals, that inevitably stories come out. And to the extent now where they're like, you never talk about, you never tell your basketball stories. Can we sit down one time and have a chat? I'm like, yeah, we will, but it's not what this. But they're only just sort of starting to ask now, 2.5 years later, and not many of them. But no, it's just I'm just someone who's come into the community, and like anyone, I think who comes into a small town, there's a bit of skepticism. This pub hasn't done well the last couple of times, and there was some skepticism that there was another out-of-towner coming in to probably be here for a short period of time and nick off again. And as much as we'd like to assure them, or we tried to assure them, that wasn't our plan. Proof's in your actions, not in your words. And they're starting to understand our vision. That's a really lame term, I know, but they're starting to understand our why, I suppose. And they've been really, really supportive of the pub.
You mentioned you're in your 50th year. I don't know if you've turned 50 yet or not.
I have, yes.
Yeah, and the why on things now, it becomes a bit more perspective. I'm curious to know, your relationship with basketball and what your why is now.
My relationship with basketball is I still own the Taranaki Airs, so I'm a minority owner of a professional basketball team in New Zealand. I got out of coaching. I loved coaching and loved what it taught me as much as perhaps what I was able to share with others. But I found it to be so time consuming for a small number of people. I wanted to be around more and more people. And I wanted probably the flexibility to consider new projects. I wasn't even something like this. And I've got the pub here, but I've also got a cafe and music venue in Melbourne called Arco Bar with the same business partners. Very different business models, and I spend more time up here. That was existing when I bought it, but I couldn't have committed it if every Tuesday night, every Thursday night, every weekend I had to be involved in coaching a group of people. So the NBL started last night, and I was running a trivia night, keeping a little bit of an eye on Melbourne United, beating Tasmania, and I'll go to however many games I go to this year. But my relationship it's taught me lots. It's introduced me to some incredible people, and I'll always have an interest as a fan. But my young son plays it, so perhaps my next relationship with basketball may be getting back into coaching. I don't want to coach him, but I fear I may have to. If there's so many basketball teams in Melbourne these days, and the coaching knowledge is spread pretty thin, especially when you get down to lower levels. And parents do an incredible job, and if I can help in that space, and I'd like to think perhaps I can at, say, under 12 or under 14 level if required. I may jump back in then, but I'd want to have this ticking over pretty well, and I'd want there to be someone who could jump in on the weeks or the days I couldn't be there. So more than anything, it's taught me an absolute heap, and I still count a lot of my best mates as basketball people.
And Chris, where basketball is in Australia, you just mentioned then around the demand versus supply and the court shortages and the ref shortages, and at the grassroots level, it's probably, I'd say, the fastest growing or one of the fastest growing sports in Australia. How does that make you feel now, growing up, when predominantly it was very, very popular in the late 80s when there was no probably other major sports? But then, the US influence, and now it's just really kind of Australian. Like, there's obviously Australians go over to the US and Europe, etc. But the grassroots is very, very strong. your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
the grassroots always has been, and I mean that's consistently grown year on year. And even when the top level, so the NBL, the WNBL, was struggling, the grassroots was still incredibly strong. And every time they asked for investment, they'd roll out the statistics of kids playing basketball around the state and the country. I don't think that's ever been the problem. In fact, sometimes the popularity of junior basketball becomes a problem because of lack of court availability and lack of quality referees. And when you do get to the pointy end, the under 14 sevens teams afforded the same amount of court time as the under 18 ones. And I've always thought there are two different types of basketball participants. Ones who will participate, and ones who want to become professional, or ones who aspire to do something great. And they've got to be treated differently and afforded different amounts of time on the court. And sometimes our good kids just can't find that time on court. So you go to America, and I'm not suggesting America's got the right model, it doesn't, or Europe, and you'll be in an academy, or where you go to school will be where you train. And you'll have access to those facilities for hours and hours every single day. Our kids don't have that, or many of our kids don't have that. And, we don't have that level of coaching. And our kids hear from so many different voices. They'll have, the good ones will have a state coach, a rep coach, a domestic coach. And there's so much confusion in so many kids who could be great if they only listen to one voice. But there becomes confusion as well. So it's a really, really interesting conversation. And maybe the biggest part, and you speak to people in other sport, and our basketball kids just play all year round. They'll play a grand final one week, they're round one the next week, it seems. They just don't get a time for their bodies to relax and for their brains to relax and to go and maybe invest in their body a little bit. And it's just week on week. There needs to be a break. I think we need to remove the penalty for really good kids not wanting to play all year round and take a few months off, take a season off. I think that's a healthy thing, and so many kids burn out. So basketball, it's in a really good stage, and now you flick to the top level where we're talking about the NBL stadiums are full. People always refer back to the mid-90s when I started, the early 90s to mid-90s when I started playing, and they talk about the 15,000 people at Rod Laver Arena, and it was incredible. But that was 4 games a year. Those same people didn't turn up the next Wednesday when we played the Canberra Cannons, and there were 3,500. It wasn't 15,000 every game. That's rose-coloured glasses. I think the consistency of attendance around the country and for every single team has risen. It's on TV. The kids can tell you NBL players' names. The jerseys are more available. So the league's in an exceptionally strong position at the pointy end as well now. So across the board, it's going very well.
When you were growing up, did you know the names of players, of sports players, etc., that you had some sort of aspiration to? And what were you doing as a kid? It wasn't basketball early on, but your love of sport was obviously pretty strong.
Yeah, I played tennis. I think it's pretty widely known. My doubles partner from the time I was, 10 all the way through until we finished up was Dustin Fletcher. He went to footy a year before I went to basketball, and no, look, I wanted to play Wimbledon. We were a really good doubles combination. We actually went through a period of 4 years. We didn't lose, but we still couldn't make an Australian team because they'd take the two best singles kids and play them together. And we're like, shit, we just beat them 3 tournaments in a row, but they weren't picking a pair to play doubles. They'd take 2 kids, and that was really disheartening. Probably the thing about basketball when I started, and I sort of fell into my brother's team, but there was a game every weekend, and there was a training. I mean, there was still training every week with tennis, but there was a game every weekend. With tennis, I had to wait for school holidays to play in tournaments. Junior and senior competition had breaks, so I found that I could play and be around a group of people more often. And I suppose, interestingly enough, one of the biggest reasons that I enjoyed moving across to basketball was my height was considered an advantage, and it wasn't picked on or teased or anything like that. It was actually welcomed. So that probably kept me going along at the start, and I was fascinated to see how much improvement I could make.
You talked about kids and the voices now, lots of coaches, lots of different types of things. 2025, and you might have a strength and conditioning coach, and you might have this, and a regional coach, etc. Your voices that spoke to you early on in terms of your career, was there some inspirational voices, some ones that you did trust, or was there a lot of noise as well?
No, I was lucky. I had Des Middleton to start. He was the under-18 Melbourne Tigers coach, and he was absolutely patient with me. He made sure my teammates were patient with me. And he really simplified things. In one of the things that I'm I didn't start until I was 17. One of the things I'm fortunate for, through accidentally starting that late, I suppose, is I didn't pick up any bad habits as a kid. And that was one thing, even knowing Des and knowing the team that I was on and how good the team was. I walked into probably the best team in definitely Victoria, maybe Australia. They've won international competitions. So that's who I was learning from. But they'd all develop great habits. So many young kids pick up bad habits. And then from Des, my first year and a bit, I went across to Al Westover, and he was exactly the same. It was absolute basic fundamentals. Get the basic fundamentals right. Forget the flair, forget all of that, get your fundamentals right. Again, good habits. One of the things through those two coaches, before I even found Brian Goorjian, and he was probably still as grateful as I am for the first two. Gorge took it all to another level, but they'd always say that, and you see it today, the kids are learning about recovery. So they've got a game on Saturday that the coach and the players want to win. So they have this light session on a Thursday. We would be working our asses off, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we'd turn up to games exhausted because we didn't care if we won or lost. We actually didn't mind as much. Of course, we all wanted to win, but we all had somewhere to go. And the kids who recover on a Thursday because the coach wants to win on a Saturday, they'll never make it because there's another kid out there working their ass off, and that's their normal, and they're getting used to playing tired. And they're finding hours and hours more to invest into their skill set and invest into their body than you are because you're recovering from work you haven't done because that's now a fad. So that I was really fortunate for that. And then Goorjian took that to another level. There's so many stories I could tell about Gorge, but just with the habit, I was 18 months in with the Magic, and I was sleeping I was exhausted. My body couldn't go anymore. I was sleeping on the stadium benches in between sessions. I couldn't run. I was still only playing 8 or 9 minutes a game my second year at the Magic, so my third year in the NBL. And there was this one session, by my own form, I was unreal. I was the best I've ever been. I was the best player on the court. I kind of had this smirk. I'm like, wow, outrunning everyone, dunking on. It was unreal, this one session. And the minute the session is done, as in the minute I've had my shots after the session and all, Gorge calls me up in the office, and he looks me down the eye and goes, "How do you reckon training went today?" And I sort of had this smirk. I wanted to say, "Mate, I was unreal." I sort of went, "Yeah, all right." He goes, "All right." He goes, I thought you're incredible." And I sort of nodded, and he said, "Did you do anything different this week?" I'm like, "No." And he said, "Think about it." And so as I thought back, and as he led me to, we'd had one less weight session. We'd backed the weights off. The individuals had been non-contact. We'd only gone 30 minutes. Essentially, he tapered me off for the last 5 days. And I said, "I'm rested." He said, "Yep." And he swore. I'm probably not allowed to swear, but you can edit this out. He goes, he said, "Do you see it now?" And I nodded, as in, "Do you see what you're capable of now?" He said, "Do you see it now?" And I nodded with a smile and went, "Yep." And he goes, "Well, fucking get back to work." And so many young players quit because they get tired and they don't see instantaneous results. And I always got told that the best results come after putting years in, but then that becomes your normal. So my normal became something that I know players I've played with had no ability to get to because I didn't think I was capable of working as hard as I was. And I say that every one of the Southeast Melbourne Magic players was. But we looked around the league and we knew no one else was working as hard as what we were and didn't have the chance that we had to be successful.
In that conversation you've just talked about, there's zero talk of winning, right? It's about the process and the result. And this is something that I've learned over these interviews over the last year with the result is the result. Like you go out and you trust the process, but finding your process and finding your habits to get to that self belief that Gorge kind of unleashed in you and that process. I'm curious now as a parent when there is competitive sport now and there's divisions and grading and all that sort of stuff. The emphasis on winning from parents and other things is a bit high when I was growing up.
Parents are the worst. They're the biggest roadblock for kids because they want their kids to win. In the nicest possible way, I want my kids to lose because it teaches them more. I don't need my kids to play the highest level that parents want their kids to play. I'd rather them play a lower, more appropriate level and explore what they're capable of doing and grow their game and expand their game. I really subscribe to the drive home theory where so many kids are lost to the sport because of the review that the parents give or the excuses the parents make or the suggestions that parents make. And, even this year my son plays football and basketball, but I just hear some of the parents yelling out during the game. And in my head, I'm like, shut up, Chris. But what they're yelling is completely wrong, but they think it's right. So a very basic example would be that there'd be an under 10 kid and the parent would be yelling, get on your man. And I'm like, no, jump to the ball and get on the split line. The parents have no idea and they're confusing their kids. So look, and coaches who believe that winning or getting a higher grade is success at junior level, it's not. I actually coached my first ever coach. I didn't want to be a coach. My first ever coaching job was at Caulfield Grammar. I actually took over from Bruce Palmer, who's a legendary coach.
Yeah, he's actually at Brisbane Grammar now. Yeah.
There you go. So to take over from him was really daunting because I knew, and he'd coached me. He was the assistant coach of our under-23 World Championship winning team. So I knew Bruce, and it turns out he actually recommended me, and that surprised me, but I had my interview and I was one of a number of people who interviewed for the job. And I remember saying, and they told me later on that was the key reason I got it. I said, I actually don't care about bringing trophies to this school. And I walked past and there was a Chris Judd, West Coast Eagles Guernsey. There was a Brendan Goddard, I think St Kilda Guernsey. I said, I'm more interested in having kids develop and go on and do something and be successful because of the habits we instill in them at school, a little bit like their education. If we win, we win. But I'm really fascinated to see what these kids are capable of so that they can carry that with them and maybe one day they come back and say, remember when you said that? A little bit like what I was saying about Des Middleton. And that apparently got me the job. And that's all we ever focused on, knowing that we're a very small part of these kids' developmental journey, not running sets and not putting a whole nother offensive system and defensive system in, but putting in elements of any, say we'd put in a pick and roll, we'd put in a stagger away, but things that you could take back and put into any system that they're probably running. Now, it turns out we won a few APS titles. We won state championships. We won national championships. When I say not without trying, we had a talented team. But that was never our goal. And I learned that from the minute I started. And a big part of that for me, and even when I took over at Dandenong and became director of coaching, was sitting every parent down before the season started and saying, go back to your first question, here's our why. Here's why we're doing things. If you don't understand, but here's what we need from you. If you don't understand, ask me. Don't ask the coach. Definitely don't ask your son or daughter, or don't criticize. Come and see me and I'll explain it to you. But if we're all preaching from the same choir book, your son or daughter will have a much greater chance of being successful and growing within this club.
Those processes and habits and inevitably probably values that are instilled in you in terms of what your thinking and your mindset, taking that to the pub now, the new venture, like Monday could be busy or it could rain or there's other external factors. Your processes and your values now, they're still the same from when you were growing up in terms of sport?
Yeah, I'm more front of house. So every time somebody walks into the pub, the experience, the minute they walk in, what do they experience? The minute they sit down, what do they experience? When the food's brought out, what do they experience? The interaction between staff and customers, all of these different types. But again, and I think I started to say before when winning wasn't the priority, Gord used to always say, win or lose at the end of the game, you walk down the other end of the court, you shake their hand, you look them in the eye, and if they beat you, it wasn't because you weren't your best, it was they were better than you, and we'll go and work and get better again. And that's a bit for us. And my thing, it's a little bit different with the pub, but it's not a mantra, but what I say to all the staff, as long as our intent is right, we're okay. So if our intent is to be great to the customers and we make a mistake, I think we'll get a little bit of leniency. But never try to lie to them, never try to bullshit them, never try to cover something up. If your intention is to create a great experience and you don't quite get it right, then you go and be transparent. Say, I made this mistake. I'm really sorry. The only times we've had a couple of staff roll in and out for a short period of time who've tried to be or think they're more clever than the customer and try to bluff their way, you get caught up in it. So transparency and intent for us here, and I've got all the time in the world, a little bit like basketball, again, to tie it back to your question, I always said to my players, on the offensive end, I'll give you all the freedom in the world as long as your intent's right. So if your intent's not selfish and you don't continually make the same mistake, I'll give you all the freedom in the world. I get the defensive end. So the defensive end of the pub's our routines and our processes. I get that part. You get to your personality, you get your conversations, you get all the flair. Be you. Because you're representing this pub, but I get the process part. You get that part right. If your intent's right with all the rest, then we're good and you've got a job as long as you want.
Basketball is incredibly individual. As a person, you have to work on yourself and your skills, etc. But then you mentioned as part of a team, you're knowing your role within the team. How did you go about that with different roles in different teams, from the bench to starting, etc. And now the reflections and the connection from that to the pub of knowing your role, but also having that individual kind of charisma or character shine through and self-belief.
The biggest one you mentioned to start with, and the one that does my head in, is starting versus coming off the bench. Who cares who starts? People get so caught up on the first 4 minutes of the game. Worry about finishing a game. If you've earned the right to finish, I was always more worried about finishing a game. Now, I eventually got to the NBA, and I've told a bunch of kids who come to me and complain about, I played 3 minutes a game my first NBL season with the Tigers. I played 5 my second with the Magic. I played about 10 my third. And my fourth year I got drafted. I did not – the only reason, and I hate the reason that I ended up starting, but I didn't start until midway through my third season when John Dodge, who was our starting centre, ruptured his ACL. But I was playing more minutes. Then when I got to the NBA, I started less. I came off the bench more than I started. I came off the bench when I came home to the Victoria Titans. Even after playing in the NBA, I came off the bench as often as I started in Russia for 3 years. The first time I was a consistent starter was at 30 years old at the Melbourne Tigers.
13 years after you picked up a ball, basically.
Yeah. I never get, who cares about who starts? You know, I've seen situations of players where a coach will say, okay, start. You can start, no problem. Subs them off 3 minutes into the game, sits them the rest of the first half and say, well, you started. Is that what you're after?
You tick the box, mate.
Yeah, or do you want to play?
Yep.
So, I mean, roles it fluctuates. One day it's one thing, another day it's another, but there's always a base level of expectation. It goes back to what I said before. Everyone is equal on the defensive end. Everyone does their part. Offensively, there's different levels of talent. So there were different times when I was literally get to the offensive glass if I can run my lane. You know, when I started playing the game, when I was at the Magic, my goal was to sprint the middle lane every time, never make a post move in an NBL game. If I could get one basket in transition a half, I had 4 points a game. And if I could get one offensive rebound a half and maybe a putback, now I had 8 points and 2 rebounds. Start your game there and then build from that instead of here, roll it to me in the post, here's my post package, you know. So, again, basic fundamentals came first, and that put me on the court. And I think that's the same here. If you know the basics and you know the processes, you're behind the bar or you're in the bistro, then the flair comes next because you're already on shift or you're already on the court. But it's not the other way around. The flair or the highlight part doesn't put you on the court. That just happens because you happen to be on the court.
And with that processes and those roles and the talent and whatnot that people saw in you, to again they get picked for your country and to play for your country. I'm curious to know about the culture of the Boomers and how with multiple leagues around the world, people coming in for a short period of time and trying to get it right. And you've experienced it in multiple Olympics. The cultural, there's something special about putting the green and gold on versus maybe a Dallas Mavericks jersey.
Yeah, there is, and it's interesting because there has been a lot said about Boomers culture and all that sort of thing lately. But I mean, it's like any other culture; it goes through waves. And there were certainly parts of playing for the Boomers that I hated because of the way the young kids were treated by the old players. There was that whole rookie veteran thing. I used to hate turning up to Boomers camps because you just know you're going to be picked on, carrying bags, you get all that sort of shit, and you'd hate it. And I wasn't the only one. And then sometimes, if I'm ever, and I remember there was a particular, if I'm ever in a leadership role, I think there's a choice that you can carry on the way it's always been, or you can say it's never going to happen again if by chance I'm ever a leader. And I was always the second way. Boomers culture now, it's what's spoken about and what's internal is oftentimes very different. And there are great eras of it. There are eras where it struggles, but it's certainly become more consistent over the last probably 12 to 16 years, I think. It's established itself. People only talk about culture when you're winning. We won our first medal and, it was an incredible effort to win that bronze medal, but I still haven't heard people talk about Opal's culture who won a gold medal, who've consistently medalled in world championships and Olympics. But from where I sat, we always aspired to be as successful as what the ladies were on the global stage, but we never were. They still are leaps and bounds ahead of the men's program when it comes to competitiveness at major events. And, in most sports, the women are striving to catch up to the men in certain elements, and we won't dig into that. But I think from a Boomers Opals perspective, the men still have to be striving to catch up to the women. And I would be, if I was someone studying culture, I'd still look at, what's the Opals culture like? And what the Opals culture did was got rid of the most talented player they had at the time, and probably one of the top 3 or 4 most talented players in their history, because she was a cancer to the team and a horrible influence. They said, no, our culture's more important, you're out. And to me, that's strength.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's very powerful. We've had Sandy Brondello on the podcast and Brian Gordon too. So and one of the trivia questions I was going to ask you later on is how many medals have the women won in Olympics?
Lots.
The answer. And 3 silvers too. So against Team USA. So maybe 28 with Sandy at the helm again, potentially go for gold again if things go their way. Now, a couple of questions I ask my guests. One is the scoreboard moment, and that's a moment in your life, very visual, a bit like a Kodak moment, a sliding doors moment, but you remember it clearly, and from that moment, your life changed.
I've actually got so many. I've jumped in the car to play my first men's C-grade game of basketball, feeling sick in the stomach and thinking I don't want to be here. And then halfway up the drive thinking I'm here now, I might as well try. And I got seen by a junior basketball coach from the Melbourne Tigers because a tall, skinny 7-foot kid could run. That was all I could do. There just along the way, there's a lot. I got one chance to play Michael Jordan, and early in the game when I got on the floor, felt like I didn't belong. You'd probably call it imposter syndrome, people tell me, but I didn't know that at the time, and I was shit the first 2.5 minutes. I thought, I'm about to get dragged. I might as well try to remember this. And I didn't know at the time. I was telling myself not to care what other people thought. And I didn't figure that out till a bit later. But that's the moment where I didn't care what anyone thought about me. I was just going to be me. And we ended up winning the game, ended up playing a lot. And, the times in Russia when I sat there alone thinking, what have I done? This is shit. And I, thinking that there's no one coming to save me, it's on me. People always want someone else to come and help them, and sometimes that's a good thing, but oftentimes you got to help yourself first. So there's lots and lots that are, God, I could tell you heaps. Picking up the phone, I literally going through a divorce when I wasn't allowed to see my kids, and people ask about, how do you handle adversity? And oftentimes it's not well, but I picked up the phone and called Jason Ackermanis, of all people. I was a Western Bulldog. I still am a Western Bulldogs fan. And all I wanted to do was talk to someone who had seemingly gone through adversity so much, but always seemed to be able to perform well. And I was still captain of the Melbourne Tigers at the time. And Jason Ackermanis was the name that sprung to mind. So I called the front office. And as I hung up, I thought, you're an idiot. That he's never going to call back. He called back before I even got home. I kept driving and we caught up and we spent so much time together that year, and he helped me get through a divorce. So many moments along the way, and it is nice to remember them and reflect on them. And I'm grateful for. We're talking about to a friend the other day. I'm actually as grateful for the shit times now that you're through them as I am the good times, and sport gives you both.
People say you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I'm keen to know your thoughts on that.
It's great until there's emotion involved. Anything you can write any word, and people are smart. You can write stepping out of your comfort zone, like you said, be comfortable being uncomfortable, handling adversity. Work ethic. They're words on a wall. No one's got any idea what they mean until you're in them, and it's how you actually respond when you're in them without knowing that that's the word that you're going through. The seminars and the talks that people talk about, they don't mean shit. They're just words on a wall. It's going through those moments and going through those emotions and experiences, figuring out who you trust, who's around you, and then coming out the other side and figuring out what you learned, but knowing that, like success, these times aren't forever, and getting through those shit times. So that's sort of it. Everyone knows the words, everyone's smart, but add emotion, and as human beings, we tend to make poor choices when we're emotional, whether it be good, bad, excited, sad, angry, name an emotion. We don't make logical choices. So probably one of the best things I've learned, and it took some saying some dumb things and acting poorly, that I'll shut up and almost walk away from an emotional situation and wait till I know what I've got to say before I come back to it. And that took a lot of time.
And the importance of listening. Are you a good listener?
Better. Yeah, I am. I am. I fascinated in people's perspectives and fascinated in what people are going through. And everyone knows the saying, but it's really real. Listen with the intent to learn, not to respond. And like even some of the questions here, I can't even remember what you asked, but just listening with the intent to learn what they're going through, learn about what they like, learn about what they're teaching you, not listen with an intent to prove that you also know or one-up them with a story, which there's one of the things you hear in a bar a lot. the one-ups of the stories and everybody knows the answer. No one just – sorry, I shouldn't say no one. That's horrible. There are a lot of people who they listen wanting to respond, and you don't need to give an answer. You don't need to have a solution. Sometimes you just need to listen.
There's a lot of I would imagine there's a lot of problems being solved in the world after a few years.
There are, and it's another whole really interesting conversation for another time. But the one thing you get sometimes is you don't need alcohol. Of course you don't need alcohol. What's the saying? You don't need shoes to run, but sometimes they fucking help. Sometimes it just drops your barriers down a little bit and allows you to relax and drop your walls and just have a conversation that you might not have if you're wound up. And it doesn't have to be, it just has to be the right people. But it's funny how sometimes the right people find their ways into a front bar or something like that and just settle in and have deep and meaningful conversations in that type of environment. It doesn't have to be in a psychologist's office. It has to be with the right people in the right environment, wherever that is.
Now, you're a sports nut and you played sport all your life. And the question I ask my guests is their all-time favourite sporting moment. And I preface this that it doesn't include yourself.
The Western Bulldogs winning the 2016 AFL Premiership by a million miles. I never thought I'd see it. I've never seen my dad cry. I was there with my brothers and my dad. And just as a Western Bulldogs and a Footscray fan growing up, I never thought I'd see it. It was just unreal.
we had Dale Morris on talking about that tackle. We had Tom Boyd on, just wonderful human beings. Now Dale's at the Lions at the moment, so the Mighty Lions are playing tomorrow night. Big game. What are your thoughts on this year's AFL? Pretty even.
Yeah, it is. I'm fascinated. The Lions are depleted. Collingwood haven't been playing great. I really love what you're saying. I do enjoy watching sport, but I really, really enjoy watching sport at this time of the year because unlike what we said before, right now winning does actually matter, especially at a professional level. And I love seeing people's responses to and I say pressure, although pressure doesn't actually exist. It's all mental. Nothing changes if the crowd's louder. But I love seeing how people respond when there is an immediate impact depending on the result that particular day. You don't have this week. So how do people respond? Those small moments, the bounces that go the wrong way, but more importantly, the decisions that you make when a game's close and the result is the absolute priority. That part really fascinates me.
I reckon September in Australia is just the best time of the year. The weather's pretty good, like not cold. You've got finals footy in all codes, broadly speaking, and it's endless sport. How good?
Oh, it's unreal. It's flick it on any weekend and you just settle in sometimes. I'm going to do the same this weekend, as a matter of fact. I've got a few junior games of basketball I'm going to. A good mate's coaching a state final on Sunday, ironically, with Caulfield Grammar, where he was still is a girls' coach. And he was a girls' coach even back when I was started as a boys' coach. Speaking of creating great cultures, that's one. And it doesn't have to be at a professional level to talk about it, right? The impact he's had on, generations of young female athletes has been incredible. So we'll go and watch his grand final on Sunday, but he's actually a Brisbane Lions fan as well, and he'll go to the game Saturday night, and we'll watch the game tonight. And no, you're right. It's an incredible time to be a sports fan in Australia at this time of year.
Oh, it's so good. And then also just the feeling as well when as you mentioned, like the pain and also the jubilation, and it's actually really powerful to watch how much people care about the game. Like obviously you lose and there's tears. It's like, well, there's tears because that person cares a lot. If they didn't care, then they shouldn't be playing, right?
Spot on.
There's an emotional attachment there.
Spot on, 100%. And it was interesting seeing the emotion. So the Trentham Saints, just to go back to the very start, haven't won a premiership in 31 years. And there are two really important stories that I've loved, two really interesting observations. Boomer Harvey came and played. He played 3 games to qualify, then he played every final. And even on SCN radio, I've heard they bought a premiership, Boomer's lining his pockets, all that sort of thing. So Boomer Harvey's now wife he met when he was 17. They've been camping with the locals up here for 30 years. He came up as a favour. And I had a chat to him. I won't tell you. Clearly they paid him a little small amount of money, but he got offered more than 5 times that amount for the entirety of the 6 games. He got offered more than 5 times that amount to play one game over different weeks. So he wasn't up here because of the money. He was up here because of the relationships he's formed over the last 30 years. And I think that was really special. And not enough people, in Melbourne, not that they care about the Trentham local footy club, but I know they care about Boomer Harvey, and I think it's really important to tell that story because his why is his mates, and the relationships. He's actually playing with kids that he was changing their nappies on the campsite, before he was an AFL player. And the second part was interesting, not as deep as that, but in the week before the final, we played Carisbrook in the final. All of the finals this year are at Carisbrook. It's not fair. We finished on top. They get the home. I'm like, hang on a sec. You broke for Collingwood. You broke for Richmond. Do you know what you're saying here? They said, what do you mean? I said, look, Collingwood could finish 6th and Brisbane make the grand final. You get home ground advantage. You're not complaining about it. It's just it. Just play wherever the hell you play and deal with it. If you're looking through that lens, And so I enjoyed having that conversation with the locals because I really, really mad for the first couple of days that the grand final was at Carisbrook. I said, look, they picked the venue before they picked the teams in the grand final. It was always going to be here, just like the MCG. Call it an AFL round. You're Collingwood or Richmond finishing 5th or 6th. They've got home ground. Just go win. No one cares where the game is. It's a grand final. Go win. And they did, and it was, you know what? It was one of the best, most emotional celebrations I've been around for a long, long time, seeing how much it meant to so many people.
That's amazing. And at the age of 50, to actually own the pub and to have that sort of central connection of like, let's go there and have a bit of fun and celebrate, and that connection of community. That's brilliant. Of all the experiences that you lived, and now you're living through, the deep connection of sport and business as well. Speaking of sport and business, our sponsor here at Scoreboard is Swyftx. They're Australia's most trusted cryptocurrency platform with over 1.2 million users in Australia and New Zealand. As part of their sponsorship with Scoreboard, we do a little segment called the Bucket List. And the Bucket List is the sporting event that you haven't attended thus far live that you would love to attend. And it's part of their new campaign, Where Can Crypto Take You? Chris, I'm curious, your bucket list sporting event that you haven't attended live in person.
Wimbledon, then daylight. I still have. It was always my goal as a kid to play in it, win it. Now it's just my goal as an adult to go to it. And I'm a little bit disappointed I didn't get there before they put the roof on centre court. I've been to the US Open, clearly Australian Open. I haven't been to the French either, but I need to find a time to get to Wimbledon.
And when you go to Wimbledon, what do you reckon you do? You do like multiple days, or you try and get the finals? You just walk around, you just strawberries and cream?
Walk around the back courts and watch the real tennis over the first 4 days of the tournament. Watch your finals on a screen in a pub somewhere in London. But no, even the Australian Open, I'm qualifying in first few days of the tournament when the real, inverted commas, the real tennis happens.
And you can follow the players and you can write them down and be prosperous and watch them grow. And if they succeed, they do. And if they don't, then whatever. But it's fun. Chris Anstey, thank you so much for being on Scoreboard this morning. I really enjoyed the chat, and thank you for sharing some insights into your life as a professional athlete, but now the next chapter as a publican, and the good work that you're doing, and looking forward to supporting and sharing where I can.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me, and look forward to chatting again sometime.